The alien scientists stood in awe, their elongated fingers tracing the smooth metallic surface of the captured human warship. It had taken them years to bring it down, a seemingly abandoned vessel, floating in deep space, unresponsive to their hails. The Collective, an interstellar empire spanning hundreds of systems, had spent decades underestimating humanity. To them, humans were a primitive, aggressive species, unsophisticated compared to the grand intellect of the Collective's finest minds. But they were curious. Humans had risen too quickly, adapting to space warfare at an alarming rate. That was why they had dragged the wreckage to their research station orbiting Vrexia Prime, eager to dissect it. The ship was unlike anything in their fleet. Thick armor plating, crude yet efficient weaponry, and a design that seemed to prioritize resilience over elegance. It was an insult to their sleek, sophisticated warships. And yet, despite its battered state, there was something unnerving about it. Lead researcher Zal Roth clicked his mandibles in satisfaction as the dissection commenced. His team of scientists, brilliant minds from across the Empire, had already mapped out most of the external structure. Now, they would breach the interior and uncover the secrets within. The first cutting laser sparked against the hull, barely leaving a scratch. Zal Roth frowned, ordering the power increased. The second attempt produced a faint glow before dissipating. The warship was resisting. A murmur rippled through the research team. It was impossible. No ship material in the known galaxy could withstand their plasma cutters. Frustrated, they deployed a molecular destabilizer, a device capable of breaking apart matter at an atomic level. The result was horrifying. The warship screamed, not an alarm, not an electronic warning. A deep, resonant, guttural roar echoed through the research bay, shaking the walls and sending shivers through every being present. The lights flickered. A static-filled, distorted voice rasped through the intercom system in a language they did not understand. And then, the ship moved. Not mechanically, not like a machine under external control. It twitched, like a wounded predator awakening, its steel flesh shifting in defiance. The readings from the ship's core spiked wildly, power levels fluctuating between dead silence and catastrophic overload. Zal Roth stumbled back, his breath hitching. This wasn't a simple warship. This was something else, something alive. The ship had let them take it. It had let them drag it into their facility. And now it was waking up. The lights in the station dimmed further. One of the researchers screamed as the warship's hull pulsed, like the beating of an ancient mechanical heart. They had thought they were studying an artifact, a relic of war. They were so wrong. The ship had been watching them the entire time. The research station trembled as the warship continued its unnatural awakening. Consoles sparked, the overhead lights flickered erratically, and the station's artificial gravity wavered for a brief moment, sending a ripple of panic through the researchers. Zal Roth clutched onto a nearby railing, his mandibles clicking in distress. "This isn't possible," one of his subordinates stammered, his translucent skin shifting to a pale shade of fear. It's just a ship." A mechanical groan resonated through the research bay, like metal grinding against itself, but deeper, almost deliberate. The warship's hull rippled, its structure subtly shifting as though it was stretching after a long slumber. Then the real horror began. The station's internal security systems, holographic scanners, surveillance drones, automated turrets, suddenly turned off. Not failed, not malfunctioned, disabled. The station's entire network had been severed from within, every system going dark one by one, as if something was devouring their control. Zal Roth activated his personal emergency beacon, signaling the station's central AI. "Control, this is lead researcher Zal Roth. We have a level—" Static, he tried again. "Control, do you read? The warship is—" A new voice answered. It was human, deep, raw, and laced with something that sent cold terror into his very core. It was not a distress call. It was not a plea. It was not even an attempt at diplomacy. It was laughter. A low, guttural chuckle, like something ancient amused by the folly of lesser beings. Then a voice, distorted but unmistakably human, crackled through the intercom in flawless collective standard. "Did you think we wouldn't notice?" Zalroth's breath hitched. His researchers stared at the speakers in horror, some trembling, others frozen in place. The voice continued, unhurried, taunting. "You thought you could dissect a human warship, that you could study it like some dead specimen. Tell me, little scientists." The station trembled again, a deep vibration that wasn't coming from their engines, but from inside the warship itself. "Did you even wonder why you found it abandoned?" A cold dread sank into Zalroth's stomach. They had wondered. They had questioned why such a powerful vessel was left drifting in deep space, but the arrogance of the collective had assured them it was just a lucky salvage. An old wreck. They never considered that it wasn't abandoned. It had been waiting. One of the researchers, unable to contain his terror, bolted for the exit. He didn't make it 5 steps before the warship reacted. A surge of energy burst from its hull, an unseen force that lifted the researcher off the ground and crushed him against the bulkhead with a sickening crack. His body crumpled like an insect underfoot. The warship's laughter returned, deeper this time. Almost hungry. Zalroth realized with a sickening clarity that this was no ordinary warship. Humans were known for their unconventional warfare, their relentless adaptability. But this was something else entirely. This was a trap, and they had sprung it. The warship's systems surged back to life, its dormant engines humming with lethal intent. The station's automated doors slammed shut, locking them inside. Zalroth barely managed to activate his emergency override, his mind racing for solutions. They needed to get out. They needed to run. But deep down, he already knew the truth. There was nowhere left to run. The warship's engines flared to life, casting an eerie red glow across the research bay. The collective scientists scrambled, their once rational minds reduced to sheer panic as the ship's presence became overwhelming. Zalroth's mandibles clicked frantically as he accessed his personal data slate. He tried to send an emergency transmission to the main collective fleet, but the signal failed before it even left the station. The warship wasn't just controlling their systems, it was hijacking them. Then the station's artificial gravity reversed. Researchers screamed as they were flung against the ceiling. Equipment shattered, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and Zalroth barely managed to grip onto a rail, his talons digging in as his body strained under the sudden shift. The voice returned, clearer now, as if it was enjoying this. "You took something that wasn't yours." Zalroth dared to look toward the warship. The hull was no longer rigid. Sections of it pulsed and twisted, shifting like organic muscle. It wasn't just a machine. It wasn't even just a weapon. It was alive. "Did you think we built our warships like yours? Hollow, lifeless things?" The voice was smooth now, controlled, mocking. "Number ours, remember. Ours adapt. Ours learn." With a loud snap, the gravity inverted again. Bodies hit the ground with bone-cracking force, several researchers landing in unnatural positions. A gurgling sound came from one, his lungs punctured by his own shattered exoskeleton. Zalroth's vision blurred. He struggled to focus. He had to understand. What was this thing? One of the remaining researchers, a younger scientist named Vrelnak, pushed himself up, his limbs shaking. "Please!" he cried, desperation thick in his voice. "We didn't know. We were only trying to study." The warship cut him off. "And now you understand." The ship moved, Not just the exterior, the inside. The walls rippled as if they were breathing. Sections of the hull peeled back, revealing layers of shifting metal intertwining like sinew. Zal Roth finally understood. This wasn't a warship in the way the collective understood warships. This was something else, a human weapon. The collective believed themselves superior because they crafted their ships with logic and precision, built by the finest minds to be the pinnacle of engineering. But the humans? They didn't build warships, they bred them. "You thought you were dissecting a corpse," the voice said, dripping with amusement. "But we don't leave our dead behind." Zal Roth's stomach dropped. That meant you weren't analyzing a warship. The entire station trembled. The hull groaned as the warship expanded, its once contained structure shifting, unfolding, growing. You were dissecting a prison. A horrifying realization hit Zal Roth. The humans hadn't abandoned this ship. They hadn't lost it in battle. They had trapped something inside it. And now, thanks to their arrogance, it was free. The warship's exterior plating split open, revealing a glowing core that pulsed like a furious heart. The station's emergency sirens blared. Power readings were off the charts, levels that shouldn't have been possible. Run! The warship didn't say it as a threat. It said it as a courtesy. Then the energy surge hit. A blinding flash engulfed the research bay, and Zal Roth's world was consumed by white-hot agony. Zal Roth's consciousness flickered like a failing light. His vision swam, the world around him reduced to broken fragments of sound and sensation. Screams, alarms, the sickening crunch of collapsing metal. The research station was dying. He was still alive. The warship's energy surge had devastated the bay, incinerating several of his colleagues instantly. Others lay broken, their bodies twitching but unresponsive. Zal Roth tried to move, but his limbs felt distant, disconnected. His chitinous exoskeleton had cracked from the impact, a sharp, burning pain radiating through his torso. Through the smoke and flickering emergency lights, he saw it. The thing inside the warship. The hull had fully opened, and the creature it had imprisoned was emerging. It was neither machine nor organic, but something in between, a shifting, writhing mass of dark metal and pulsing veins of unnatural energy. It moved with deliberate slowness, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. Zal Roth's secondary eyelids fluttered. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. This was no human warship. It had never been. It was something they had captured, and the collective had just set it free. A broken voice rasped through the station's dying speakers. Not the cold, taunting voice from before. This was different. Weaker. More human. "You don't understand what you've done." A human voice. A living one. Zal Roth turned his head painfully. At the far end of the bay, trapped beneath a twisted console, was a figure clad in a torn, black, armored suit. Blood pooled around him, seeping through the cracks in his damaged helmet. The visor flickered erratically, revealing half a human face. One eye burned out, the other filled with raw, desperate fury. "You let it out." Zal Roth's throat tightened. His mind reeled. What is it?" The human coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Something we should have left buried." The warship, or whatever had been pretending to be one, let out a deep, bone-vibrating chuckle. It wasn't just alive, it was aware, and it was looking at them. Then, without warning, the station tilted. The artificial gravity had failed completely. Zal Roth felt himself lift from the floor, weightless, as the structure groaned under the sudden shift. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off sections of the station that had already been breached. Red emergency lighting cast everything in eerie shadows. "It's waking up," the human whispered. His voice had lost all arrogance, all defiance. He wasn't a warrior now. He was a man staring into the abyss. You don't run from it. You don't fight it. You either kill it fast, or you die screaming. A tendril of shifting black metal extended from the warship's core, wrapping around the mangled remains of a nearby researcher. The body twitched, then convulsed. Zalroth watched in horror as the scientist wasn't simply crushed. He was absorbed. The collective had always believed in superior evolution. That knowledge was power. This thing agreed. And it was learning. The human struggled against the wreckage pinning him, blood bubbling at his lips. "Listen to me," he hissed. "You still have a chance, a slim one, but you need to get to the station's core and overload the reactor." Zalroth stared at him in disbelief. "You want us to destroy the entire station?" "There is no station anymore," the human snapped. "There's only it now." As if to emphasize his point, the walls shifted. Not just bent or warped, moved. The station's structure was changing. Pieces of it peeled away and reassembled themselves, like a living puzzle rearranging to fit a new form. The warship, no, the entity, was spreading, integrating the station into itself. Zalroth's mind shattered under the realization. This wasn't a creature escaping from a prison. It was a disease infecting its next host. And they were trapped inside it. The human gritted his teeth, forcing himself up. "Do you want to die as data for its next evolution, or do you want to end this before it reaches your homeworld?" Zalroth's limbs trembled. He had devoted his life to science, to the pursuit of knowledge, believing that understanding led to control. But here, now, he understood the real truth. Some things weren't meant to be studied. Some things weren't meant to be found at all. And if they didn't stop this now, the collective wouldn't just lose a research station. They would lose everything. The station groaned like a dying beast, its very structure warping under the will of the entity they had unwittingly unleashed. Zalroth's claws scraped against the cold metal floor as he tried to push himself upright. The research bay, once a sterile, orderly place of logic and discovery, was now a twisted nightmare of shifting walls and spreading tendrils of blackened metal. The human was struggling to his feet, breathing heavily. His armored suit was damaged beyond repair, one of his arms hanging limply at his side. But his good eye burned with the fierce determination that made humanity so dangerous. "We don't have time," he growled, voice strained. "It's already rewriting the station. The longer we wait, the less of it is ours." Zalroth's instincts screamed at him to run. But where? Every corridor, every doorway was being consumed, twisted into something other. The warship, no, the thing, wasn't just adapting. It was assimilating. "What is it?" he rasped. "What did your kind create?" The human turned his gaze to the pulsing mass at the heart of the station, a deep scowl on his bloodied face. "We didn't create it." His fingers tightened into a fist. "We found it." The revelation sent a fresh wave of dread through Zalroth. The collective had always assumed humanity's rapid technological advancements were due to sheer adaptability and relentless innovation. But this implied something far worse. "Then why did you keep it?" Zalroth demanded. "If you knew what it was, why didn't you destroy it?" The human let out a bitter laugh. "We tried." A shriek echoed through the station, metallic yet organic, an unnatural distortion of sound that set every nerve in Zalroth's body alight with fear. A section of the warship's hull peeled away, revealing something that should never have existed. A face, not human, not collective, not anything recognizable. It was a shifting liquid metal visage, too many eyes forming and unforming, mouths stretching wide but never speaking. A thing that had once been contained, a thing that had learned from its captors. and it was smiling. "It remembers," the human muttered, almost to himself. "It always remembers." The station lurched again. The thing's presence spread, assimilating bulkheads, control panels, even the corpses of fallen researchers. Zal Roth's horror deepened as he saw them move. Twisted shapes, once his colleagues, now nothing but hollow puppets with dead, unseeing eyes. The entity was repurposing everything. "Move!" the human barked, grabbing Zal Roth by the arm and pulling him toward an emergency access hatch. "If we get to the reactor, we can overload it manually." Zal Roth hesitated for a fraction of a second. His mind, ever the scientist, wanted to understand. But some things were beyond understanding. Some things were only meant to be destroyed. He ran. Behind them, the thing whispered, not in words, but in a voice that crawled into their skulls in 1,000 overlapping echoes. It wasn't angry, it wasn't afraid, it was hungry. And it had just begun. The corridors of the station twisted around them, shifting like a living labyrinth. The emergency lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows as the thing spread its influence, tendrils of metal and pulsing black veins creeping along the walls. Zal Roth ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The human moved ahead of him, his battered body driven purely by grim determination. Every few seconds, the station groaned as though alive. And behind them, the remnants of Zal Roth's research team followed, not as survivors, but as things, reanimated husks moving in jerking, unnatural motions. "Faster!" the human barked. "It's learning." They burst into a secondary corridor, sprinting past airlocks and sealed bulkheads. The station's original structure was barely recognizable now. Entire sections had transformed into jagged hallways of black metal, pulsating with eerie, rhythmic energy. "How close is the reactor?" Zal Roth gasped, his legs burning from exertion. "Not close enough," the human muttered. He stumbled slightly but pushed forward. "If we can reach the core override panel, we can trigger a full meltdown." Zal Roth's mind reeled. "That will destroy the entire station. That's the idea." A deep, resonant chuckle echoed through the station, vibrating the very walls. It wasn't coming from the speakers. The thing didn't need technology to speak anymore. It was everywhere. "You think you can contain me again?" The voice slithered into their thoughts, low and amused. "You think I haven't grown since last time?" The walls shifted. The corridor ahead of them collapsed inward, sealing their path with writhing black metal. The lights behind them died, replaced by an ominous red glow. They were trapped. Zal Roth turned, mandibles clicking in rising panic. The way back was no better. The husks of his former colleagues shambled closer, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light that pulsed through the station's veins. "Damn it!" the human growled. He reached to his hip, retrieving a small, dented device. "Cover your eyes." Zal Roth barely had time to process before the human threw the device down the corridor. A blinding flash erupted, sending a shockwave of searing white light. The husks screamed, writhing as the energy burned through them. "Move!" Zal Roth didn't argue. They surged forward, ducking through a side passage as the corridor behind them collapsed completely. The station shifted again, corridors opening and closing, walls twisting as though trying to herd them. "It's manipulating the structure," Zal Roth panted. "It's controlling everything." "Yeah," the human grunted. "It's what it does." They reached a blast door, one of the few still untouched by the infection. The human slammed his fist against the control panel. The door refused to open. "We don't have time for this," Zal Roth hissed. "We don't need time." The human ripped open a maintenance panel, yanking out a handful of cables. Sparks flew as he crossed two of them, forcing a hard reset. The door hissed open, just as something slammed into the bulkhead behind them. They turned, and Zalroth froze. The thing was no longer just tendrils and metal. It had a form now, an amalgamation of twisted flesh and shifting metal, standing tall, its many eyes watching them with something almost curious. It had learned. "Run," the human muttered. They ran. The thing laughed, and the station screamed as it began to die. The reactor core loomed ahead, a towering structure of pulsing energy encased in thick plating, one of the few areas of the station that hadn't yet been corrupted. But that wouldn't last. The walls surrounding it were already shifting, veins of black metal creeping like hungry roots, pushing toward the core as if the thing knew exactly what they were trying to do. Zalroth's breath came in ragged gasps. His exoskeleton ached, his limbs felt like lead, but he couldn't stop. Not now. The human stumbled forward, gripping the control panel near the core's override console. His hands were slick with blood, his damaged armor barely holding together. "I'll force a meltdown," he rasped. "We get this thing to critical, and then we pray it goes fast." "And how do we get out?" Zalroth demanded. "You want us to die with it? If we don't, everything else will." A deep shudder ran through the station, the air growing thick with static. The tendrils had reached the bulkheads, pulsing, spreading, infecting. The thing was adapting faster than they could move. The reactor lights flickered. "It knows," Zalroth whispered. "It's trying to stop us." "Then we go faster," the human muttered. He began inputting a series of emergency override commands, his fingers shaking but precise. The walls groaned. And then the bulkhead behind them exploded. Zalroth barely had time to react before the force of the blast sent him sprawling. He hit the floor hard, his vision swimming. Pain lanced through his side. Something was broken. The thing stepped through the smoke. It had changed again. It was no longer just a shifting mass of tendrils. It had taken shape. A twisted, towering figure, its elongated limbs covered in sleek, chitinous plating, its face, if it could be called that, shifting between distorted forms. It was learning, and it had made itself humanoid. "You are amusing," it said. The voice was no longer purely alien. It carried a human mockery, layered with something deep, something wrong. "You break what you do not understand. You fear what you cannot control." The human struggled to stand. "You should have stayed in your cage." The thing tilted its head. "I was never the one in the cage." The reactor pulsed. Warnings blared, dangerous radiation spikes, critical system instability. The human had done it. The meltdown had begun. "We have to leave," Zalroth shouted. "The explosion will consume everything." "Not fast enough," the human gritted out. He reached for something on his belt, a detonator. "What are you doing?" Zalroth's voice rose in horror. "Finishing this." The thing moved. The human lunged, a blur of motion, impossibly fast, brutal. The detonator slammed against the core's stabilizer, locking in place. The human twisted, throwing Zalroth backward just as the thing struck. The last thing Zalroth saw before the blast consumed his vision was the human, grinning, bloody, spitting one final word at the thing that had doomed them all. "Burn." Then the world turned to fire. A soundless explosion engulfed everything, light, heat, destruction, all blending into a singular moment of oblivion. Zalroth felt his body torn away by the force, an overwhelming sensation of being flung into the abyss. Then, darkness. For an eternity, or perhaps only seconds, there was nothing. Then suddenly pain. His senses returned in a chaotic flood, his limbs numb but intact, his vision blurred but functional. He was alive. Somehow. Zalroth coughed, his lungs struggling against the acrid smoke, curling through the fractured remnants of the station. The walls were no longer shifting, no longer alive. The black metal had gone still, frozen in place like a dead husk. The core was gone. The human had done it. But at what cost? Zal Roth pushed himself upright, his body screaming in protest. The remains of the reactor chamber surrounded him, shattered and exposed to the void. Only the station's emergency containment fields keeping the last fragments of atmosphere intact. The floor beneath him was cracked, glowing embers scattered across twisted metal. Then movement. Zal Roth turned sharply, his instincts bracing for the worst. But it wasn't the thing. It was him. The human lay motionless amid the wreckage, his armor blackened and shredded, his body barely clinging to life. His breathing was shallow, his exposed flesh burned, but he was still there. Still human. Zal Roth staggered forward, collapsing to his knees beside him. "You insane creature!" he rasped. "You actually did it!" The human let out a ragged chuckle, barely more than a breath. Took everything with it? Zalroth glanced around at the lifeless remains of the corrupted station. The tendrils, the twisted mockeries of his former colleagues, the thing itself. All of it was gone. "Yes," he murmured. "You destroyed it." The human exhaled slowly, a grim smile tugging at his cracked lips. "Good." Zalroth hesitated, staring down at the dying man. In any other circumstance, they would have been enemies. The collective had fought humanity for decades, convinced of their own superiority. But now he understood. "Why?" Zalroth asked, his voice quiet. "Why did you fight so hard?" The human's eye opened slightly, hazy with pain, but still burning with something raw, something defiant. "Because we don't lose." A faint vibration rumbled through the wreckage. Zalroth stiffened, his heart pounding. The station was collapsing. The containment fields wouldn't last. They had minutes, maybe less, before the void took them both. Zalroth's mind screamed at him to run, to save himself, but he hesitated. He looked at the human again, this strange, reckless, impossible creature who had done what no scientist, no warship, no empire could. And he made a choice. With great effort, Zalroth grabbed the human and slung him over his shoulder. The weight nearly crushed him. Humans were dense, but he pushed forward, staggering toward the last emergency escape pod. Behind them, the station groaned one final time. Zalroth didn't look back. He sealed the pod, slammed the launch sequence, and let the abyss take them. As the pod shot into the black void of space, away from the burning remains of the station, Zalroth felt something unexpected. Not victory, not relief. Respect. The collective had feared humanity's weapons, their warships, their relentless expansion. But they had been afraid of the wrong thing. What made humans terrifying wasn't their technology. It was their refusal to kneel. Zalroth exhaled slowly, glancing at the unconscious human beside him. Perhaps the war between their species had always been a mistake. Perhaps it was time to reconsider who the real threat had been all along.